Okay, so back to Paul, our favorite friend, sort of. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about Paul. Okay, and I just need to straighten out my sheets that I give you. I put the date at the top for today, and then it says for next week, because since you have this, I'm not writing a bunch of stuff and printing a bunch of stuff for you. Otherwise, the for next week would have been down farther. So if it says for next week, that means go home and read it and do those questions for your small group next week. Okay? I know normally you get, 8 or 12 pages from me, but colored this way. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, how many of you spent a little time going through this? A couple of you did. Great. A couple of you didn't. More than a couple. So we're going to do some things. Mine's almost wearing out already because everything I'm doing, I'm going, oh, I should look and see when that happened. Oh, I should look and see who was with him. Oh. Anyway, I like stuff to look at. It helps me to learn and to remember. So what we're going to do is start out with page 6, which is the very end on the inside, I guess, maybe that's 7. Look for Paul's thorn in the flesh. Okay, what I did is I put down all the Bible verses that they have listed in here. So I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to read the Bible verses as we come to them in there. So if you're like me, normally I never do that. When there's another Bible reference, I just skip over it because it takes too long. So I woke up at 2:30 this morning, so we're doing it. I had time to look them all up. And if I fall asleep, it's because I woke up at 2:30 so I could print all the Bible verses for me to read to you. I'm reading them from the NIRV, which is the reader's version of the NIV. So hopefully it is very understandable. It's a translation that I love to use to compare with my other Bibles that are harder to understand. So let's read and read. The Apostle Paul endured great hardships to serve the Lord. 2 Corinthians. Are they serving Christ? I'm serving him even more. I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I have worked much harder. I've been in prison more often. I've suffered terrible beatings. Again and again, I almost died. 5 times the Jews gave me 39 strokes with a whip. And remember, 39 strokes is all you can give because 40 will kill a person. 3 times I was beaten with sticks. Once they tried to kill me by throwing stones at me. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've had to keep on the move. I've been in danger from rivers. I've been in danger from robbers. I've been in danger from my fellow Jews and in danger from Gentiles. I've been in danger in the city, in the country, and at sea. I have been in danger from people who pretended they were believers. I have worked very hard. Often I have gone without sleep. I've been hungry and thirsty. Often I've gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, every day I am concerned about all the churches. It is a very heavy load. If anyone is weak, I feel weak. If anyone is led into sin, I burn on the inside. Okay, you might want to go home and read that with your translation, because that's pretty interesting scripture that I'm sure most of us have never read. Because how often do we read stuff that we're not exactly assigned? Okay, moving on. Yet something tormented Paul and was an incredible burden for him. Paul referred to this burden as a thorn in the flesh. 2 Corinthians, God has shown me amazing and wonderful things. People should not think more of me because of it. So I wouldn't become proud of myself. I was given a problem. This problem caused pain in my body. It is a messenger from Satan to make me suffer. No one knows exactly what this thorn represented. Some suggest that Paul had a chronic physical weakness, such as An eye problem. I never heard that one. So why aren't you treating me the same way now? This is Galatians. Suppose you could have torn out your own eyes and given them to me. Then you would have done it. I am a witness to this. Okay, a speech problem. 2 Corinthians, some say his letters sound important. They are powerful. But in person, he doesn't seem like much. And what he says doesn't amount to anything. Okay, so some people pretty much didn't care about him, I guess. Or a disease. Others suggest that Paul was continuously battling addiction, temptation, or regret for past sins. This is Romans. We know that the law is holy, but I am not. I've been sold to be a slave of sin. I don't understand what I do. I don't do what I want to do. Instead, I do what I hate to do. I do what I don't want to do. So I agree the law is good. As it is, I am no longer the one who does these things. It is sin living in me that does them. I know there is nothing good in my desires controlled by sin. I want to do what is good, but I can't. I don't do the good things I want to do. I keep on doing the evil things I don't want to do. I do what I don't want to do, but I'm not really the one who is doing it. It is sin living in me that does it. Okay, and so of course I will get lost doing this back and forth. What did I just read? Romans. Okay, see also Numbers 33 says, but suppose you do not drive out the people living in the land, then those you allow to remain there will become like needles in your eyes. They will become like thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live. And Joshua 23, then you can be sure of what the Lord your God will do. He won't drive out those nations to make room for you anymore. Instead, they will become traps and snares for you. They will be like whips on your back. They will be like thorns in your eyes. All that will continue until you are destroyed. It will continue until you are removed from this good land. It's the land the Lord your God has given you. And Judges, I have said something else. I said, I will not drive out those people to make room for you. They and their gods will become traps for you. Okay, so battling addictions and all those kinds of things. Several scholars say Paul's thorn was the persecution he endured from the Jews wherever he traveled. Acts 10, I served the Lord with tears and without pride. I served him when I was greatly tested. I was tested by the evil plans of the Jews who disagreed with me. And 2 Corinthians, titled Paul's Vision and His Painful Problem. We can't gain anything by bragging, but I have to do it anyway. I'm going to tell you what I've seen. I want to talk about what the Lord has shown me. I know a believer in Christ who was taken up to the third heaven 14 years ago. I don't know if his body was taken up or not. Only God knows. I don't know if that man was in his body or out of it. Only God knows. But I do know that he was taken up to paradise. He heard things there that couldn't be put into words. They were things that no one is allowed to talk about. I will brag about a man like that, but I won't brag about myself. I will brag only about how weak I am. Suppose I decide to brag. That would not make me a fool, because I would be telling the truth. But I don't brag, so that no one will think more of me than they should. People should judge me by what I do and say. God has shown me amazing and wonderful things. People should not think more of me because of it. So I wouldn't become proud of myself. I was given a problem. This problem caused pain in my body. Okay, then we move on to wherever I am down here farther. He prayed 3 times about that this problem would leave him. And the verse says, 3 times I begged the Lord to take it away from me. The Lord told him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And in this translation, but he said to me, my grace is all you need. My power is strongest when you are weak. So I'm very happy to brag about how weak I am. Then Christ's power can rest on me. Paul said his thorn in the flesh made him humble before God and kept him from exalting himself. He was content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, because when he was weak, the Lord's strength and power were made evident. And we've already read that part. So, does that help you to get a little more of what's happening than when we just read and skip over the Bible verses? It does make a difference, doesn't it? So, when you're reading something, give yourself a little more time, and then you can do it, and maybe get into the habit of doing it more. It helps us understand more, I think. And the Bible's hard enough to understand, so any helps we can give ourselves, I think, is a great idea. Okay, so those are Paul's thorn in the side. Now, the reason why I had you take a couple extra sheets of paper in case you didn't have them is because David Suchet also gave us a little booklet along with the video, and he tells us a little bit about each letter. And, you know, we have on the back of this what the kind of message from each one of these letters is, but that isn't always easy for us to figure out a whole message from a half a sentence. So I'm going to read a little bit of what he said. Also on here is when it was written. Okay, so I'm going to read the little blurb about each one when it was in the order of how it was written. In the Bible, they are in there according to length. So Romans is first and Philemon is last. So it goes shorter, 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 shorter. Maybe that's because if you make it through Romans and Corinthians, it's downhill all the way to read them all. Especially when you get to Philemon and it is one chapter, just a few verses. And then you can check off in the front of your Bible that you read that book of the Bible. Awesome. That's what I like to do. Oh, look how many I've read now. Get that Philemon, quite a few checks, though, when I'm behind. So I'm going to read them in the order of how they're listed on here. You can see where he was when he wrote them. So following along on his journeys and stuff, we're not going to do that, but you can do that so you'll know what was going on in the city where he was and why is he writing this letter to these people? One of the questions I believe I had you work on for today was to read about his experience in Thessalonica, and then to read 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and to see, is that what you would have written if you had been treated the way Paul was treated in that city? Okay, because Paul writes phenomenal things. And so he was not treated well in Thessalonica. If you remember, he had to flee to Berea where they welcomed him. But his books to the Thessalonians are filled with all kinds of good stuff for us to live by. So one of my questions is, does it make a difference looking at what you read in Acts and what happens to him, and then to read the letter right after that? Because you see what has happened to him and how he responds. Now, he doesn't respond immediately when he gets out of town. It's later. But still, for someone to be treated the way he was treated, frightened, threatened with death, beat up, well, how many things did we read about what's happened to him? And yet, he turns around and he writes these incredible letters to these cities that he came from. Kind of makes me rethink my thoughts about Paul when I put it in perspective of how he lived and what he did. And then instead of turning around, I may not send a nasty letter. I might be thinking about it. I just wouldn't do anything. I mean, but I certainly wouldn't write the incredible loving things and God-filled awesomeness, that's a mouthful, that he does. So if you can, and I know like Romans is long, but he didn't go to Romans first, so you don't have to read Romans. But if we do other ones, Ephesians, when he's in Ephesus, Corinthians, when he's in Corinth, if you can read after you see what happens to him, it's really different. I think it gives us a whole nother look at him, which I don't think hurts me. I know it doesn't hurt me. Okay, so first one is Galatians. He's in Antioch at Syria, and he kept going back there a lot. Remember, that was the one down just north of Jerusalem in Syria? He kept going back to that Antioch. This epistle, and this is why you can take notes if you want. So I'm not printing these out for you all. This epistle was sent to not one, but several Christian communities in the Roman province of Galatia, in the central part of Asia Minor. Remember, that's kind of a big one over by where he grew up in Tarsus. You can find it up higher. At that time, many non-Jews were converting to Christianity, leading some Jewish believers to assert that the converts would have to become Jews first. In this great letter on freedom, Paul refutes the notion that the new believers would have to become subject to various elements of the Jewish law, such as circumcision and observance of the Sabbath. He reemphasizes that believers were justified by faith in Jesus Christ rather than by keeping any legalistic rules. So, Galatians a good book? Yeah, it's a book of freedom, isn't it? Freedom to believe in God, whoever you are, wherever you are, without having to do a checklist. And remember, with the Jewish people, checklists were really important. Even Paul said, I lived by the letter of the law. And the letter of the law was all of the rules that the Jewish people were supposed to live by. Okay? It's a tough way to live, I think. Okay. Next one. Thessalonians. Okay, this is the first epistle to Thessalonians. This may be the earliest of Paul's letters in the New Testament and was likely written from Corinth with the assistance of Silas and Timothy. And remember, Timothy was a very young boy when he joined him. It seeks to encourage the believers in Macedonian port city. Like 2 Thessalonians, it makes frequent references to the end times and the second coming of Christ. And the second epistle, Paul, again with the assistance of Silas and Timothy, repeats many of the themes of his first letter to the Thessalonians. He also seeks to encourage persecuted believers in the city and exhort them to be steadfast in their faith, to keep working at their daily jobs, and not to expect the return of Jesus Christ until the man of lawlessness is revealed. Okay, people are saying, because they hear from Paul that Jesus is coming again, they quit working. Well, maybe it's today. I don't need to be at work when it happens. I'll be at home. And then tomorrow, well, maybe it's today. I'll stay home again. I'm kind of getting hooked on those soap operas. But you can see the problem. He's coming. And Paul certainly thinks he's coming in his lifetime. That's why he's so frantic about everything he does. I have to get everywhere and tell every possible person I can about Jesus because he's coming back now. And of course, we've lost the franticness of telling people about Jesus because we have no idea. Could be now, but because it hasn't been for a couple thousand years, we've kind of lost the edge on the need to evangelize better. That was my lecture for the day. Okay, so that was 3. Fourth one is first letter to the Corinthians. Likely written in Ephesus with the assistance of a believer named Sosthenes, this letter was dispatched to the church Paul had founded in Corinth, an important trading center that was the home to many nationalities. In it, he addresses his role as an apostle, as well as the divisions that were emerging from the Corinthian church after his departure. He communicates to them his desire that they would have unity of belief. Chapter 13 is known as the love chapter. Okay, we're going to hear a little bit about Athens and Corinth in the video today. And remember, Corinth is a super huge seaport. They've got, I don't know, red light district down by the docks. I don't know what they called it back then, but it's a wild, wild town and very, very big. Okay, 2 Corinthians. After writing his first epistle to the Corinthians and then possibly visiting with the church there, Paul wrote them this second letter with the help of Timothy from Macedonia. Okay, that's up north in Greece. He challenges the false teachers who were active in the church and questioning his legitimacy as an apostle. In 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, which we just read, Paul makes references to a thorn in my flesh that God used as a means to keep him humble, though he doesn't explain what the thorn was. Did you get anything out of that paragraph I just read? Maybe yes, maybe no, because I didn't and I read it. And I have read it before. Okay. He goes back to the church and he writes them a second letter. And what has happened is that they're starting to doubt who he is. What are his credentials? Is he really an apostle, or is he just this frantic person running around getting beat up with all the stories and stuff? And so he's challenging the leadership in the church to keep it faithful. Because it's very easy for churches to step away from the faithfulness and to worry about everything else. Okay, to worry about whose house we're meeting in. Remember, they didn't have a building. So who's having it tonight? Okay, do they have enough chairs? Who's bringing the wine? Who's bringing the appetizers? Because it became a big feast. And the problem with these, and we'll hear a little more about this in the story, is that these house churches, which is what they were both the wealthy and the not wealthy people coming together for worship. But they had a meal, okay? Communion was a part of their meeting and a part of their meal, but they would have a meal first. So the rich people would have this enormous spread, and as it says in one place, you're eating, the other people are starving, because the poor people brought their little bag lunch of tortillas. And then the rich people also would drink with their meal, so the wine wasn't set aside as communion. So there was this big discrepancy in the two people getting along. So this is an important thing in the church that needs to be addressed. Okay, number 6, we go to Rome, and he was not there first. Coming after the 4 Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, Romans is the 6th book of the New Testament and considered Paul's most important. Paul likely wrote the letter with the assistance of a certain Tertius while he was in Corinth, and it was carried from there to Rome. In the imperial capital, the new faith had taken root among Jews as well as Gentiles. Differences between these two groups of converts, especially over the role of Judaism in the new faith, is one of the topics of Paul's letter. Romans has been described as a summary of all Christian doctrine, and dubbed the gospel according to Paul. And so many people know something from Romans that they can quote. There's something in there that touches all of us, because it's kind of everything. Okay, then we go to the Ephesians. Ephesians has been characterized as one of Paul's imprisonment letters from Rome, but it may have been written by one of his disciples. For more than 2 years, Paul had led the church in Ephesus, capital of the Roman province of Asia. The letter does not seek to correct any particular heresy or error among the members of the local Christian community. Instead, it exhorts them to lead good Christian lives and reminds them of the unity of the church. Yay, Ephesians. They must have been doing pretty well. Okay, then we go to the Colossians. In this short letter, Paul, with the help of Timothy, seeks to stamp out heresy in Colossae, a church that he had not visited but remembered in his prayers. He again warns against those seeking to impose the Mosaic, or law of Moses, on Gentile converts. He requests that his epistle to the Colossians also be read to the believers in Laodicea, a nearby city in Asia Minor. Like Ephesians, some scholars question Paul's authorship. Okay, these letters were sent not just to a small group of people, but these letters would be taken, and people who heard Paul or whoever started the church would go and start in little villages around. And so these letters would be taken to anywhere where a church had been established so that they could read. Even though it was addressed to the Galatians or to whoever, it would go to as many places as they could send it to, so that everyone would hear kind of the pitfalls of what it was like to start a church. Because that would be really hard, wouldn't it? You have the Gentiles who have no faith background, and you have the Jewish people who don't know how to let go of all of their rules. So it had to be hard. Okay. I'm trying to watch the time. I'm going to quit there because we'll finish them next time, and otherwise the video will take too long and you won't get downstairs. So the video is Paul following some other places. He goes to Athens and he goes to Corinth. And some of this, if you remember very much at all about when we did the churches in Revelation, there were all the gods and goddesses there too.